Let's step back for a minute. For my presidential address to the Public Choice Society, I made this claim. I'm going to go through this quite quickly so we can get to the example. A lot of times in economics class, you learn that economics is the science of the allocation of scarce resources among competing needs. And that's probably not untrue. It's true in some technical sense. But it seems to me that the study of the social sciences generally, and really the fundamental human problem in the social science sense, is how can we construct or preserve institutions that make individual self-interest not inconsistent with the common good. All of us, we expect, are going to act in some ways in our self-interest. How can we reconcile that clash of self-interest? And notice I use the double negative, not inconsistent. It's too strong a condition to say that it has to be consistent, that it actually has to advance the public good. But each of us, acting on our own, whether it's Adam Smith's baker or Mandeville's bees, are acting for our own purposes in a disaggregated way. How do the aggregate consequences of those individual actions, do they add up? Are we worse off or better off for acting in our own self-interest? There are many people who would say the only moral action is one that advances the interest of someone else. It is never moral to act only in your own self-interest. I'm not going fully to evaluate that claim, but I do want to raise it. Two approaches to that fundamental human problem, the Madisonian and the Rousseauian. Madison was probably the single most important architect of the US Constitution. Rousseau was a French guy. So you can probably tell who's my favorite. Nonetheless, every society uses some combination of these. I'm quoting Madison from Federalist 51. We all knew that. Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. He talks about the construction of government. How is it that we are to guarantee that the clash of interests in government advances the interest not of the government but of the people? How can we design the government recognizing that people in government act in their own self-interest? How can we control and channel that acting in their own self-interest? Second approach is Rousseau's, a transformation of the self to solve the problem of what he called amour propre, an overweening personal pride. Rousseau's answer is to inscribe the law on men's hearts, not having the law as an external constraint. How many of y'all drove today? How many of you were speeding? Should speeding be against the law? Probably. Most of us think there should be speed limit laws somewhere. I mean, like in school zones. Most of us, I'll just go there. In school zones, you shouldn't be able to go as fast as you want. And yet, if I'm late, I'm going to speed, and if the cop pulls me over, I think, darn it, why is he picking on me? If we inscribe the law on men's hearts, we then internalize the moral force of the law. It's not an external constraint. And any of you have kids, and many of you have been kids, you go through religious training. We try to inscribe the law on your hearts. You do it not because it's a constraint, not because you're worried about punishment, because you authentically believe that it's the right thing to do. By acting in this way, I am advancing God's will. We all have some combination of this then. Madisonian approach is we're going to act in our own self-interest. The Rousseauian approach is moral teachings, and it could be a secular religion. Rousseau actually was an atheist and advocated a secular religion, a kind of worship of the state. But it still works in the sense that each of us subjugates ourselves to the power and will of the state. Does everybody see the distinction? In one case, I'm going to act in my self-interest, and we design institutions as a constraint. In the other, we try to get people to act directly, as if the law itself had moral consequences. What if we all wanted the same thing? Many people on the left, particularly, and the people who take the Rousseauian perspective, say, would government even be necessary? The problem is disagreement, and disagreement comes from property. Fruits of the earth belong to all, and the earth itself to no one. All we have to do is get rid of property, and we wouldn't have all this conflict and discord. Well, an assumption of many people who work in political economy is that we do all want the same thing. More! So, on this, Charles IV famously said, "My cousin Francis and I are in perfect accord. He wants Milan, and so do I." And so they fought a war. But the problem wasn't they didn't want the same thing. The problem was that they wanted the same thing. In this case, Milan. So, for Madisonian institutions, you remember the example of Adam Smith's baker. Baker gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning, builds a hot fire, uses really fresh, good ingredients, and brings the piping hot bread to your door at 6 o'clock because he loves you. Not. He thinks, what a jerk you are. Big fat butt sitting there in bed while I'm working. But he could charge a higher price if he wanted to. He could make lower quality bread if he wanted to, but he doesn't want to. It is in his self-interest to make the highest quality bread delivered directly to you at the lowest price he can manage. It's in his self-interest to do that which is in your self-interest. In fact, you could not as effectively direct him to make that bread cheaply if he were your slave. You'd have to get up and watch him then. You don't have to get up and watch him if he's not your slave. If he's acting voluntarily, he'll get up and do that which a perfect slave would do out of his own self-interest. Well, is there anything like the market solution and the baker in economics in politics? Is there a way that we can design political institutions so that they likewise reconcile all these discordant private interests? That's the claim that Madison makes about the design of the U.S. Constitution. The claim may be true or false, but the objective was to make ambition counteract ambition. Men are not angels, they're not ruled by angels, we're not going to assume they're good, but we're going to make the clash of self-interest redound to the benefit of the community. Rousseau has a very different approach. And this first question is great, let's be fair. This first question is a really excellent question that Rousseau asked. Let's give him his due. It is asked how a man can be both free and yet subject to wills not his own.